The morning after my 18th birthday, I was rinsing a coffee mug in the small kitchen sink when I heard tires on gravel. Not fast, not angry, just steady, like someone who already knew where they were going. Outside, the air was still cold from the night. The lake behind the cabin had that thin, silver look it gets before the sun fully clears the trees. A few paper plates from the party were stacked on the counter, and the faint smell of smoke from the fire pit clung to my hoodie. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked through the front window. A moving truck rolled up the drive. Behind it came my parents' SUV and then my brother's car. I didn't feel surprised. That was the strange part. My chest stayed quiet, like my body had already accepted this was coming. My dad got out first, smiling like it was a holiday. He didn't knock. He opened the back of the SUV and pulled out a thick manila envelope like it was a gift. "We got it all sorted," he called, loud enough for the movers to hear. "This place is ours now." He said it the way you say something obvious, like the weather, like a fact everyone already agreed on. The movers climbed down from the truck and started looking at each other for instructions. My mom waved toward the porch as if she'd been here 100 times. My younger brother, Kyle, stood with his hands in his pockets, bouncing on his heels, already scanning the cabin like he was picking his room. I stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, still holding the dish towel. "Pack your things," my dad said, still smiling. "We'll need you out by the end of today." I didn't argue. I didn't ask what he meant. I just watched him point at the front door and then at the moving truck, like he was directing traffic. And then I saw the other car, a dark sedan, parked a little off to the side, where the gravel meets the grass. A man in a suit stood beside it, calm and still. Next to him was a county deputy, hat on, folder in hand, waiting like he'd done this before. No one in my family noticed them yet. They were too busy telling the movers what to lift first. I stayed on the porch, quiet, and let that moment stretch. Because the night before, while everyone laughed and ate cake in the living room, I had stepped away for less than 2 minutes and pressed one button on my phone. Just one. And now, there was a deputy standing in my driveway. I kept my face neutral and walked down the porch steps slowly, like I had all the time in the world. I should probably back up a little. When I was 14, a letter arrived at our house in Chattanooga, the kind of letter that felt heavier than paper when I held it. It was a scholarship offer to a private college prep school across town. Full tuition, merit-based. The kind of program that changes what a kid can do with their life. I remember coming in through the front door after school, backpack slipping off one shoulder, and finding my mom at the kitchen table with her phone tucked between her ear and shoulder. She was writing a grocery list and half listening to someone on speaker. I held the envelope up anyway, standing there like a kid who still believed good news would stop the room. "Mom," I said, "I got in. They gave me a full scholarship." She glanced at it and gave me a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's nice, sweetie," she said, and then turned her head away so she could keep talking on the phone. My dad was in the living room watching a game. My brother Kyle's name came up every few minutes, because he'd been playing middle school football and my parents had decided it was the most important thing happening in our house. Dad looked over his shoulder and nodded once. "Good job," he said, and then went right back to the screen. Within 10 minutes, the conversation shifted completely. Kyle had gotten into a fight at school that week. Nothing serious, just a scuffle that turned into punches. He'd been suspended for a few days, and the whole house rearranged itself around it. My parents called the principal. They insisted it was self-defense. They hired someone to help him keep up with schoolwork. My mom baked cookies for his teammates and invited them over, like the suspension was something to recover from, like he'd been wronged. My scholarship letter sat on the counter, unopened after I'd shown it to them, like it didn't matter enough to even read the details. That night, after everyone went to bed, I opened it alone at my desk. I read it twice, then a third time, because it felt unreal to have something good happen that didn't involve anyone else's approval. I framed that letter myself with a cheap frame from a craft store and hung it on my bedroom wall. Not for attention, mostly so I wouldn't gaslight myself later into thinking it hadn't happened. That was the first time I understood something clearly. My wins were expected. Kyle's problems were treated like emergencies. The second time it hit me was the following year. Kyle was 15 and had one of those expensive bikes my parents bought him after a good season. He was riding around the neighborhood with friends, showing off, and he clipped a neighbor's parked car, scratched the side, dented the panel, enough damage that a real repair would cost a couple $1,000. I watched it happen from the front yard. I heard the metal scrape. I saw his face go pale for half a second, and then I saw him recover, because he knew what came next. My parents drove over, apologized, and wrote a check on the spot. And then, later that week, they took him to a bike shop and upgraded him to a better one. They said it was a lesson about responsibility. But when I was younger and knocked over an old ceramic bowl my mom kept from her childhood, I got grounded for weeks. No phone, no friends. A long lecture that somehow turned into a conversation about how careless I was. Kyle didn't lose anything. He gained something. That's when I stopped sharing good news in real time. Not because I wanted pity, because I didn't want to keep offering parts of myself to a room that wouldn't hold them. I learned how to be quiet, how to handle my own feelings, how to plan in my head without asking permission. And that's the kind of kid my grandparents paid attention to. The cabin came into my life the way safe places usually do. Slowly, quietly, like something you don't realize you've needed until you're already breathing differently. My grandparents, Warren and Evelyn Hale, lived about an hour and a half outside the city, up near the edge of a lake and a stretch of dense woods. It wasn't a fancy place. It was solid, hand-built, cared for, practical. The kind of cabin where everything has a reason and nothing is there just to look pretty. Weekends there felt like stepping out of noise. The drive up was always the same. The last 15 minutes on a narrow road, the trees closing in, the signal dropping out. Gravel under the tires. That little moment when the cabin roof shows through the branches and your shoulders drop without you thinking about it. My grandfather always had something to do. Fixing a section of the porch where the boards had started to soften, patching a spot on the roof where rain got in during storms, replacing a hinge, splitting wood, cleaning out the gutters. He didn't hover over me. He just handed me a tool and waited for me to figure out what came next. If I did it wrong, he didn't scold. He'd show me once, calm and steady, and then let me try again. My grandmother cooked like she was feeding people she actually liked. Stew that simmered all afternoon, cornbread that came out warm and heavy, coffee that tasted like it had been made 1,000 times in the same pot. At night, the cabin was quiet in a way our house never was. You could hear the lake if the wind was right. You could hear the woods settle. You could hear yourself think. As they got older, I spent more time there. At first it was helping with small things, carrying groceries, reading mail when my grandfather's eyes got worse, driving them into town for appointments, sitting with them when the weather turned bad. They never made a show of it. They'd just say thank you, like it mattered. And it did. One night, late in the fall, my grandfather was sitting in his chair by the fireplace. The fire was low. My grandmother had gone to bed early. He stared at the flames for a long time before he spoke. "Your dad," he said, without heat in his voice. "He doesn't handle money well." He didn't say it like a complaint, more like an observation. "And your uncle?" he added, meaning my dad's older brother. "He's always chasing the next thing, always sure the next deal will fix the last one." He paused, then looked at me like he was measuring something. "You're steady," he said. "You finish what you start." I didn't answer. I just listened. Then he said, "This place is going to you, all of it. The cabin, the land, the accounts. It's decided." He didn't ask how I felt about it. He didn't give a speech. He just stated it like he was putting something in the right hands. I remember the weight of that moment more than the words. Because it wasn't just property, it was trust. When they both passed within a year of each other, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt like the world quietly shifting and not asking if I was ready. The will was read in a lawyer's office downtown. The documents were clean, specific, no confusion. Everything went to me. Not split, not shared, not to the family, to me. After that, the way my family talked about the cabin changed. At first they acted sad, then they acted practical. Then they started acting like the cabin was a family place, which is a phrase people use when they want access without responsibility. They started showing up more. My dad would come with maintenance suggestions. My mom would walk through rooms and talk about what should be updated. Kyle would take pictures of the lake and talk about how good it would look on social media. My uncle would pace the property line with his phone in hand, reading out numbers from listings, making comments about what nearby places were selling for. The conversations always drifted to the same point: how much it was worth, how hot the market was, how smart it would be to sell. They said it like they were protecting me from a burden, but they never asked what the cabin meant to me, not once. And by the time I turned 17, I already knew I'd have to protect it the way my grandparents protected it: quietly, legally, completely. The attorney my grandparents trusted was named Daniel Mercer. His office smelled like paper and old coffee, and everything on his desk was stacked neatly, like he didn't believe in chaos. A few weeks before my 18th birthday, I sat across from him and listened while he explained the plan again. An irrevocable trust. The cabin deed transferred in, the land included, the accounts funded into it. Me as sole trustee. It was clean. It was allowed. It was final. He didn't try to scare me, but he didn't soften it either. Once you do this, he said, your family may react badly. I nodded, because I already knew. The night before my birthday party, I barely slept. The cabin was full of familiar sounds, but my mind wouldn't settle. I walked from room to room, touching the back of a chair, the edge of a table, like I was checking that everything was still real. The next evening, my parents insisted we celebrate up there. They framed it as family time. They brought food, decorations, a cake, and a lot of noise. People laughed, glasses clinked. My mom insisted on taking pictures. Kyle played music too loud. My dad kept saying things like, "This is the start of your future." At one point, I stepped away like I was just going to the bathroom. I went into the small hallway, leaned against the wall, and pulled out my phone. Daniel had told me the documents would be ready the moment I turned 18. Digital signature, time-stamped, filed immediately. My hands didn't shake. I pressed confirm. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and walked right back into the living room like nothing happened. I smiled when someone looked at me. I cut the cake. I said thank you. I listened. And then I went to bed with the cabin quiet again, like it was holding its breath. The next morning, I was at the sink rinsing a coffee mug when the moving truck arrived. And now I was standing at the edge of the porch steps, watching my dad direct strangers toward my grandparents' furniture as if he'd always owned it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I just looked past him, toward the dark sedan, where Daniel Mercer stood with a folder in his hands, waiting beside a county deputy. Then I stepped off the porch and walked down the gravel drive to meet them, and I let my family keep talking for a few more seconds before they realized the day wasn't going the way they planned. Then I waited. Daniel and the deputy were standing in that quiet space where the driveway widens, right before the gravel turns into packed dirt. Daniel gave me a small nod, nothing dramatic. The deputy's posture was neutral, hands relaxed near his belt, eyes taking in the moving truck, the open ramp, the movers hovering with a couch halfway angled toward the porch. I stopped beside them and kept my voice low. "Morning," I said. My dad was still talking, still confident, pointing out the dining table through the front window like he was listing inventory. "Start with the heavy stuff," he told the crew. "We'll sort the smaller items after." My mom was already pulling flattened boxes out of the SUV. She had a black marker in her hand and was writing labels as if she'd done this 100 times. Kitchen, linens, Kyle's room. Kyle stood near the truck, grinning at one of the movers like they were teammates. Daniel didn't speak yet. He just opened his folder and checked one page, then another. It looked like a practiced routine. The kind of calm you only get when you know your paperwork is solid. The deputy shifted his weight slightly and waited. I watched my family for a few seconds longer. It felt like watching people rehearse a play where they assumed the audience would clap. Then Daniel stepped forward, not rushing, and spoke in a clear, even tone. "Mr. Bennett," he said. My dad turned, annoyed at first, like someone had interrupted his schedule. "Yeah?" he replied. "Can I help you?" Daniel held his hand out, polite. "Daniel Mercer. I represent Mara Hale's estate plan and the trust that holds this property." The words landed softly, but they changed the air. My dad's smile tightened. He looked Daniel up and down like he was deciding whether he could dismiss him. "I don't know who you are," my dad said, "but we have documents." He tapped the thick envelope in his hand. He shook it once, like that motion alone made it official. Daniel nodded. "I'm aware. That's why I'm here." The deputy took a half step forward, not aggressive, just present. He didn't raise his voice either. "Sir," the deputy said, "we're going to need everyone to pause what they're doing." One of the movers froze with a hand still on the couch. Another looked back at the truck driver like he was waiting for permission to stop. The whole scene stalled in a way that felt almost mechanical, like someone hit a remote. My mom's marker hovered over the cardboard. Kyle's grin faded. My uncle, Ray, who had been fiddling with the straps on the truck ramp, lifted his head slowly. "What is this?" my mom asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had that edge she used when she thought she was being wronged. Daniel didn't answer her right away. He looked at me first, brief, just to confirm I was steady. I was. Then he turned back to my dad. "May I see what you've brought?" Daniel asked. My dad hesitated, then extended the envelope like he was handing over a paycheck stub to prove a point. Daniel took it and removed the papers carefully, sliding them out and flipping through them in place. No rushing, no frowning, just reading. My Uncle Ray stepped closer, hands on his hips. "This is a misunderstanding," Ray said quickly. "We're family. We're just fixing what was supposed to happen." Daniel kept reading. Kyle's eyes stayed on the deputy, not on Daniel. The deputy was real in a way paperwork wasn't, and Kyle understood that instinctively. His foot tapped against the gravel, a small nervous motion he probably didn't notice himself doing. My dad cleared his throat, trying to recover control. "The cabin belongs to us," he said. "It was always meant to be a family place. We're just making it official. She's 18. She doesn't understand this stuff." He motioned toward me with the casual dismissal I'd heard my whole life. Daniel looked up. "She understands it," he said, tone unchanged. "That's why the trust exists." My mom's face shifted, a tight little smile that didn't match her eyes. "What trust?" she asked. Daniel slid one sheet out from the middle of the pile in my dad's packet. "This document," he said, "is not valid." He held it in a way my dad could see clearly. My dad leaned in, squinting like he could change the words by staring hard enough. Daniel turned to the next page. "This one isn't valid either." He flipped another. "And this one contains an unauthorized notary stamp." Ray's jaw tightened. He did that thing where he laughs once, short, like he's about to argue it away. "Come on," Ray said. "We used a notary service, online. It's a thing now." Daniel nodded like he'd heard that exact sentence before. "The notary credential listed here does not match any active commission on record," Daniel said, "and the signatures attributed to the original property owner are not consistent with verified signatures on file." My dad's face drained a little. Not panic yet. More like the moment before panic, when your body hasn't caught up to the fact you're cornered. My mom reached for my dad's arm, lightly, as if to steady him. Kyle spoke before anyone else could stop him. "It's real," he said too fast. "I saw it. I signed too. Dad said it was fine." The second those words came out, he looked like he wished he could pull them back in. Ray's head snapped toward him. "Kyle," Ray said sharply, warning in his tone. Kyle's shoulders lifted and fell in a small shrug. He wasn't trying to be brave. He was trying to be accurate because accuracy felt safer than guessing. Daniel's eyes moved to Kyle for half a second, then back to my dad. "Who filed these?" Daniel asked. My dad opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "We did," he said. "As a family." Ray cut in. "It was just forms," he said. "Nothing criminal. People do it all the time." The deputy finally spoke again, same steady volume. "Attempting to transfer property without the legal owner's consent can be criminal, sir," he said, "especially when the instruments are fraudulent." My mom's hand went to her mouth like she was surprised by her own situation. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We're not criminals. We're her parents." Daniel didn't argue. He pulled out a different set of papers from his folder, crisp, printed, clipped neatly together. He handed the top page to my dad first, then one to my mom, then one to Ray. "This is the trust summary," he said. "Executed lawfully, time-stamped, recorded. The cabin, the land, and the associated accounts are held by an irrevocable trust. The trustee is the only person authorized to make decisions regarding these assets." He paused for a beat. "The trustee is Mara." That was the first time my mom looked directly at me that morning. Not like a parent. Like someone measuring what they could still get. My dad's hands shook slightly as he read. He tried to hide it by gripping the page harder. "This can't be right," he said. "She can't do that without us." Daniel's tone stayed gentle, almost boring. "She can," he said. "She did." The movers stood frozen, eyes moving between the deputy and my family. The couch sat on the porch at an angle, one corner still wrapped in moving blanket. It made the cabin look like it had been caught mid-breath. Ray stepped forward, voice rising just enough to show strain. "So what now?" he asked. "You're just going to kick out her own family?" Daniel didn't take the bait. "What happens now," he said, "is everyone stops moving property, immediately, and we document the attempted transfer so there's a record of what occurred today." My dad's face hardened again, reaching for control the way he always did. "We can talk about this," he said. "No need for law enforcement. We'll handle this privately." The deputy's expression didn't change. "This isn't a private situation anymore," he said. "You brought a moving crew onto someone else's property and directed them to remove items. That's why I'm here." My mom's voice went thin. "You called them?" she asked me. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the lake behind the cabin, just for a second. The surface was still. The air smelled like pine and exhaust from the moving truck. Then I looked back at her. "I didn't call anyone this morning," I said, calm. "I planned ahead." That was the first time my dad looked genuinely afraid. Not of losing the cabin, but of losing the narrative. Ray tried again, softer this time, like he was switching tactics. "Mara," he said, "you're being extreme. This is family. We're trying to help you manage something you don't understand." I nodded once, not agreeing, just acknowledging he spoke. Then I said, "I understand it." The deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to me, "do you want them trespassed if they don't leave voluntarily?" My mom flinched at the word, like it hit her physically. "Trespassed?" she repeated. "From her own family's cabin?" I didn't answer that either. I didn't need to. Daniel stepped slightly toward me, still quiet. "There's another piece you should know," he said to my dad, and tapped the edge of his folder. "This isn't only about stopping today's removal." My dad stared at him. Daniel pulled out a second document, separate from the trust summary. It had a bold header and a court seal printed at the top. He didn't wave it. He didn't dramatize it. He simply held it like a fact. "This," Daniel said, "is a notice prepared for filing if necessary. It outlines the attempted fraudulent transfer and requests immediate protective measures." Ray's mouth opened, then closed. He shifted back a step. Kyle sank down onto a taped box near the truck ramp, elbows on his knees, staring at the gravel like it might tell him what to do. My dad's voice turned small without him meaning it to. "Why would you do this?" he asked me. After everything we've done for you? I didn't argue. I didn't list examples. I didn't defend my childhood in the driveway. I just said, because I know how this goes. Then I looked at Daniel. Tell me what happens next, I said. Daniel nodded once. Step by step, he said, and opened his folder wider. And that's where I let the morning slow down, because the next few minutes were going to decide how the rest of this would work. I put my phone face down in my pocket and listened. Daniel didn't move quickly. He didn't need to. He held his folder open against his forearm like a clipboard and looked at the deputy first. Deputy, if you don't mind, he said, I'd like to state on record what we're responding to. The deputy nodded and stepped half a pace to the side, giving Daniel the space. Daniel raised his voice only enough for everyone to hear, including the movers. At approximately 9:15 this morning, he said, a moving crew arrived at this property under the direction of Mr. and Mrs. Bennett and Mr. Ray Bennett, with the stated intent to remove furniture and personal property from the cabin. They presented documents claiming authority to transfer title or control of the property. He paused and looked at my dad. My request, Daniel said, is that all activity stops immediately while we document this and issue formal notice. My dad tried to interrupt. Daniel, he said, using the name like familiarity might soften the situation. We can handle this. We don't need it recorded. Daniel didn't argue the point. He just kept going. The cabin and land, he said, are held by the Hale Family Irrevocable Trust, executed and funded yesterday at 7:43 p.m., upon the trustee reaching legal age. The trustee is Mara Hale. He said my name like it was the simplest part of the sentence. My mom made a sound in the back of her throat, half disbelief, half anger. That's insane, she said. She signed it at a birthday party? I didn't look at her. I looked at the movers. They weren't staring at me like I was powerful. They were staring at the deputy and the court seal and thinking about their job and whether they'd get paid. One of them quietly set his tape gun down on the truck's bumper. Another stepped back from the porch, hands open like he didn't want to be involved. Daniel glanced at the moving crew. Gentlemen, he said, you're not in trouble, but I need you to stop moving items until the deputy clears you to leave. The driver nodded quickly. Yes, sir, he said. That was the first shift. Not emotional. Practical. Everything paused because a third party had spoken. My dad noticed it too. His eyes narrowed as he watched the crew disengage from his instructions. He hated losing control in front of strangers. He turned back to me. You called a lawyer and a deputy on us, he said. I kept my voice even. I called a lawyer weeks ago, I said. I didn't call anyone this morning. My mom stepped forward, the marker still in her hand like a prop she forgot to put down. This is a misunderstanding, she said, and her tone changed into that softer, persuasive voice she used with teachers and neighbors. We're not trying to take anything. We're trying to make sure she's protected. Daniel answered before I did. She is protected, he said. That is literally what this trust does. Ray scoffed. And what? He said. She's just going to live up here alone? A kid? With property taxes and repairs and all that? She needs us involved. Daniel nodded like he'd heard the argument already too. That's a family conversation, he said. It's not a legal one. Then he turned to the deputy. Deputy, would you like to see the trust documents and recording confirmations? Daniel asked. The deputy held his hand out. Daniel passed over a printed packet, clipped with a cover sheet. I saw the timestamp printed in the corner and a reference number beneath it. Daniel had also brought a separate sheet, a confirmation from the county recorder's portal. A small thing, but it mattered. The deputy looked down and read slowly, then glanced up at me. Ms. Hale, he said, you're the current authorized trustee and legal controller of this property? Yes, I said. He nodded once and looked back at my father. Sir, he said, at this point, you do not have authority to direct removal of anything from the cabin. My dad's jaw tightened. We're her parents, he repeated, like it was a key that should open the door. The deputy's voice stayed flat. Parents don't override property law, he said. Not when the owner is an adult. Kyle made a small sound from the box where he was sitting. He rubbed his palms on his jeans, looking like he was trying to erase what he'd done. My dad looked at Kyle. Get up, he snapped, then caught himself and softened. Kyle, come here. Kyle didn't move right away. He glanced at my mom, then at Ray, then at me, like he was trying to figure out which version of reality to stand in. Daniel noticed, but he didn't address Kyle directly. He turned to my dad and held up the packet of documents my dad had tried to use. Let's talk about these, Daniel said. He pointed to a section. This signature line, he said, purports to be Warren Hale's signature. It is not. Ray opened his mouth, but Daniel continued without raising his voice. The notary stamp, he said, lists a commission number that does not exist. The service name referenced here is not registered with the state's remote notarization directory. My mom blinked hard. We didn't forge anything, she said quickly. We used an online notary. Ray handled it. He said it was legal. Ray stiffened. I didn't forge anything, he said, defensive. I followed the instructions. It was a website. Daniel nodded. I'm sure you did what you believed was the easiest route, he said. The issue is that the route you took is not valid, and it crosses into criminal exposure when it's used to attempt a transfer you're not authorized to make. My dad's face reddened. Criminal, he repeated, like the word offended him more than the act itself. The deputy spoke again, still calm. Title fraud is a real charge, he said. And bringing a moving crew to remove property from a place you don't control can create additional issues. My mom's hand went to her throat. This is humiliating, she said, quieter, and then she looked at me like I had arranged it purely to punish her. In front of strangers. I didn't respond to that. I watched Daniel pull out a small, thin notebook from his inner jacket pocket and write something down. Not dramatic, just documentation. Times, statements, who said what. Then he turned to me. Mara, he said, I want to keep this clean. If you want them off the property today, we do it in the simplest way. I nodded. What's the simplest way? I asked. Daniel's voice stayed steady. Step 1, he said. The deputy gives a clear instruction to leave and not remove anything. Step 2, we provide written notice that any return without permission constitutes trespass. Step 3, we document what's already happened, including the attempted transfer documents, so there's a record if they escalate later. He said it like a checklist, not like revenge. I looked at my family while he spoke. My dad was staring at the trust summary, eyes moving fast, trying to find a loophole. My mom kept swallowing, blinking like she was trying not to cry. But the emotion wasn't grief. It was shock at losing control. Ray's hands were clenched at his sides. He looked like someone whose plan had collapsed and was searching for a way to blame someone else for it. Kyle was still on the box. He didn't look angry. He looked small. My dad looked up at me. You planned this, he said. You set us up. I kept my voice level. I protected it, I said. That's all. My mom tried another angle, softer again. Mara, she said, honey, just talk to us. We can fix this. You don't need a trust. We can all be on the deed together. That's fair. Daniel's gaze moved to her, then back to me, waiting to see if I wanted to speak. I didn't. Not yet. Because the truth was, I had already talked to them. For years. In 100 small ways. It never changed anything. I turned to the deputy. Deputy, I said. I want them to stop the removal and leave today. No arguments, no bargaining. The deputy nodded once. He faced my dad, speaking clearly. Sir, he said, you need to instruct your moving crew to stop and begin packing up. You and your family need to leave the property. If you refuse, you may be cited for trespass. My dad lifted his hands slightly, palms out. like he was calming a situation he still thought he could manage. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we'll go, but this isn't over." Daniel wrote again in his notebook. My mom's eyes widened. "Don't write that," she said to him, panicked. "He didn't mean it like that." Daniel didn't look up. "I'm writing what was said," he replied. Ray stepped closer to my dad, lowering his voice, but I still heard the sharpness. "Just tell them to stop," Ray hissed. "We'll deal with this later." Kyle finally stood up. He looked at me for a second, like he wanted to speak, then looked away. The movers started backing toward the truck slowly, hands careful, as if they were leaving a scene that could turn unpredictable. My dad called to the driver, voice tight. "Stop," he said. "We're done. Pack up." The driver nodded quickly, relieved. "Yes, sir," he said. A strange quiet settled over the driveway as the ramp was lifted and the straps were pulled back into place. The sound of ratchets clicking felt louder than it should have. Daniel handed the deputy a single-page notice, and the deputy handed copies to my dad, my mom, and Ray. "Do not return without permission," the deputy said. "If you do, call will be made." My mom stared at the paper like it was written in another language. Then my dad looked at me again, and this time his voice wasn't angry. It was cold. "You think your grandparents would want this?" he asked. I didn't answer. I looked past him at the cabin, the porch, the lake beyond it. And then I said the only true thing that mattered in that moment. "They chose this," I said. My dad stood there, frozen, like he wanted to argue, but the deputy's presence kept him contained. My mom was shaking her head slowly. Ray's face was tight and pale. Kyle stayed near the truck, silent, eyes on the ground. The cars started to turn around in the gravel, one by one, tires crunching, engines revving low. And as they lined up to leave, Daniel leaned slightly toward me and spoke quietly, so only I could hear. "There's one more thing," he said. "I got an email last night, right after the trust executed. It confirms what I suspected about the notary service they used." He tapped the folder. "It connects to a larger set of filings, not just this cabin." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just opened his folder to a printed page and held it where I could see the header. Then I read the words at the top, and my stomach tightened in a way that wasn't fear. It was recognition, because it meant this had been planned longer than I thought, and it meant we weren't finished. Then I waited. When the last vehicle disappeared down the drive, the air felt lighter, like the woods had taken a full breath again. The moving truck was gone too. The only sound left was the lake wind pushing through the pines and the soft click of the deputy's pen as he finished his notes. Daniel stayed beside me near the edge of the gravel, folder tucked under his arm. The deputy looked up. "You want to walk me through what you want on record, ma'am?" he asked. I nodded once. "Yes," I said. "Just the facts." That was the point where my mind stopped reacting and started organizing. Not emotionally, practically. Daniel and I walked a few steps away from the cabin so the deputy could hear clearly without us raising our voices. We stood near the old split-rail fence where my grandfather used to lean his tools. The deputy asked for names. I gave them. He asked what they said when they arrived. I repeated it exactly, in the order it happened. He asked if they had permission to remove property. I said no. He asked if they presented documents. I said yes. He asked if any items were removed. I said no, and I pointed toward the porch where the couch still sat angled, half-wrapped, untouched. He nodded and wrote it down. No drama, just a record. When he finished, he handed me a card with a case number written in the corner. "If they come back," he said, "call the number on here. Do not engage." "I won't," I said. He tipped his hat slightly toward Daniel. "Counselor," he said, then walked back to his vehicle. As his car rolled away down the drive, Daniel didn't move right away. He waited until the sound was gone. Then he opened his folder again and pulled out the page he had shown me, the one that made my stomach tighten. It was a printed email confirmation with a header from a remote notary platform. Nothing fancy. Just enough structure to look official. Daniel pointed at a line near the middle. This is the IP log, he said quietly. And this is the device fingerprint. It ties the notarization attempt to the same laptop that filed the transfer forms. I stared at it for a second. So it's traceable, I said. Yes, he replied. Very. He flipped to the next page, a screenshot of a filing queue. There were multiple submissions, he said. Not just one packet. They tried different versions, different dates, different names. That's why I said it isn't only about the cabin. I kept my voice steady. What else did they try to file? I asked. Daniel didn't guess. He didn't speculate. He tapped the page. 2 things that matter, he said. First, a lien-style instrument that would cloud the title. Second, a claim of shared interest, like a backdated agreement. Both were rejected, but the attempts exist. I felt a cold clarity settle in. They were not just showing up with a moving truck. They were trying to build a paper trail that would make me fight for years. I looked toward the cabin. The windows reflected trees and sky like nothing in the world had changed. Then I looked back at Daniel. Okay, I said. What do we do now? He held my gaze and nodded like he'd been waiting for that exact question. This is the strategic shift, he said. Not emotional, procedural. He paused, then spoke slowly, making it easy to follow. Step 1, he said. We lock down access. New locks today. Gate code if you want it. No spare keys floating around. I nodded. I'll handle that, I said. Step 2, he continued. We notify the county recorder that any future instruments related to this parcel require direct verification with my office. They can flag the file. Do that, I said. Step 3, he said. We pull a full title history report and we monitor new filings for 30 days. If anything hits, we respond immediately. I took a breath. And step 4? I asked. Daniel's expression stayed calm, but his voice turned firmer. Step 4, he said. We decide whether to go on offense, civil action, a request for an injunction and fees. It depends on whether you want to draw a hard line now or wait to see if they back off. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to choose the right order. I walked up the porch steps and sat on the top one, bare feet on the wood, the boards cool from the morning shade. Daniel sat one step below me, folder on his knee. Inside the cabin, the air still smelled faintly like birthday cake and smoke from the fire pit. It was strange how quickly a place could hold 2 different days at once. Daniel let the quiet do its job. After a moment, I spoke. They're going to come back, I said. Daniel nodded slightly. Yes, he said. Probably with a different angle. Family pressure, a call, a letter, someone trying to sound reasonable. I looked at him. I don't want to fight for sport, I said. I want it to stop. That's the right frame, he said. Stopping behavior, not punishing feelings. I stared out at the driveway where their tires had been, the gravel disturbed in small arcs. Then I made my decision in the same way I signed the trust. Cleanly. File what you need to file, I said. I want formal boundaries. I want it documented. If they try again, I want consequences to be automatic. Daniel didn't smile. He just nodded like a professional. Understood, he said. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes. Not to text, not to posture, just to log the next actions. I'll draft a cease and desist today, he said. I'll also prepare the petition for protective relief. We can hold it unless needed, but I'd rather have it ready. I nodded. Then he looked up. One more thing, he said. I need to ask you something, and it matters. Go ahead, I said. Do they have any of your documents? He asked. Birth certificate, social security card, anything they could use to impersonate you. I didn't like how practical that question was, and that's why it mattered. I thought for a second. My mom kept a folder, I said. Old school stuff, copies. I don't know what's in it. Daniel nodded. Then we add one more step, he said. He spoke it like a checklist again. Identity lock, he said. Credit freeze, password changes, bank alerts. We close the doors they might try next. I looked down at my hands, then back up. Okay, I said. Tell me what to do first. Daniel shifted the folder and opened to a blank page. First, he said, we write down every account and login you can think of. Then we change the email recovery settings. Then we freeze credit with all 3 bureaus. After that, we call your bank and add verbal passwords. I listened and nodded, absorbing it like instructions for a repair job. Then my phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't pull it out right away. A second buzz followed, then a third, close together. Daniel glanced at me, then away, giving me space. I pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. It was my mom. 3 missed calls. Then a text appeared under them, short and sharp. We need to talk. Call me now. I stared at it for a moment, then set the phone face down on the porch step beside me. Daniel watched me quietly. I didn't feel angry. I felt organized, because now I knew what was coming next, and I knew exactly how I was going to handle it. Then I stood up, walked inside the cabin, and reached for the old landline mounted on the kitchen wall. It hadn't rung in years, but I had a feeling it was about to. Then I waited. The landline rang about 10 minutes later. It wasn't loud, just a sharp, old-fashioned ring that cut through the quiet like it had been waiting for a reason to exist again. Daniel looked up from the porch table where he was sorting papers, and I stood in the kitchen doorway for a second, letting the sound repeat. I didn't rush. I picked up the receiver on the second ring. "Hello," I said. My dad's voice came through, tight and controlled, like he was trying to sound calm for someone listening. "We're not doing this over the phone," he said. "You need to come down to town, now." I kept my tone even. "I'm not coming anywhere," I said. A pause. Then my mom's voice, cutting in fast. "Mara, please," she said, and she sounded like she was already crying, but I knew that voice. It was her public voice, the one she used when she wanted to be seen as the reasonable person. "This is a misunderstanding. You embarrassed us. You scared Kyle. You had a deputy here like we're criminals." I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I just said, "You brought a moving truck." My dad came back on. "We brought help because you don't understand what it takes to maintain a place like that," he said. "We were doing what was best for the family." I let the word hang. "Family," I repeated softly, not sarcastic, just factual. Then I said, "Daniel is here. If you want to discuss anything legal, you can speak to him." My dad exhaled sharply. "I'm not talking to your lawyer," he snapped. "I'm talking to my daughter." I didn't raise my voice. "You are talking to your daughter," I said. "And I'm telling you how this works." There was a long pause. I could hear someone in the background, maybe Ray, talking low. My mom said something muffled like she was urging my dad to stop. Then my dad's tone shifted to something colder. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" he asked. "Your grandparents are gone. That property should have stayed in the family. People will talk. You've made us look like thieves." I kept my voice flat. "You arrived to take furniture," I said. "That's what happened." My mom's voice returned, softer, pleading. "Honey, we were going to help you," she said. "We were going to manage it until you're older. You're 18. You don't know anything about taxes or insurance or how to handle a property. You're going to lose it anyway if you don't let us step in." I listened. I didn't interrupt. Silence is useful when someone is trying to build a story. When she finished, I said, "I hear you." Then I added, "The trust is in place. That decision is final." My dad laughed once, sharp. "So you're cutting us out," he said. "That's what this is." "No," I said. "I'm setting rules." He didn't like that. Rules meant he couldn't argue feelings. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You can't just hide behind paperwork. We're your parents." I looked at Daniel through the open doorway. He was still on the porch, calm, pen in hand, writing down times and statements. Not because he was dramatic, because he was precise. Then I spoke into the receiver. Dad, I said, I'm going to be very clear. You do not have permission to come back to the cabin. If you show up again without permission, I will call the deputy. My mom made a small gasp. You wouldn't, she said, like she was talking to a younger version of me. I will, I said. My dad's voice rose, not shouting, but sharp. You're letting that lawyer poison you, he said. Your grandparents would be ashamed. That line was meant to pull me back into the old pattern. Guilt, obligation, confusion. It didn't land. I kept my tone calm. My grandparents chose me for a reason, I said, and I'm honoring that choice. Another pause. Then Kyle's voice came through, quieter, like someone had taken the phone from my parents without permission. Mara, he said, and he sounded scared. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was illegal. Dad said it was just paperwork. I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to answer him carefully. I believe you, I said. That's why you need to stop signing anything anyone puts in front of you. If someone asks you again, you say no and you walk away. He breathed out, shaky. They're mad at me, he said. Ray's mad. Dad's mad. Mom keeps crying. I didn't respond to that part. I kept it simple. Kyle, I said, I'm not trying to ruin your life. I'm trying to protect mine. Those can both be true. He was quiet, and then I heard my dad in the background, angry, taking the phone back. This conversation is over, my dad said into the receiver. You can expect to hear from our attorney. I didn't argue. Okay, I said. Send everything to Daniel. My dad hung up. The line went dead, and the cabin fell back into quiet. I set the receiver down gently, not slamming it, and walked out onto the porch where Daniel was waiting. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't need to. He just lifted his eyes. They said they'd get an attorney, I told him. Daniel nodded. That's common, he said. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it's a bluff. I sat at the porch table across from him. The wood felt rough under my fingertips. The air smelled like pine and cold lake water. What do you need from me? I asked. Daniel slid a yellow legal pad toward me. I want you to write down a few things, he said. Not emotions, facts. He tapped the top of the page with his pen. Dates of visits, he said. What they said about selling, any texts about sharing or splitting proceeds, any mention of paperwork before today, anything you saved. I nodded and started writing. Not fast, just steady. As I wrote, my phone buzzed again on the table. This time it wasn't my mom. It was a number I didn't recognize. A voicemail icon appeared right after, then a second missed call. Daniel looked at the screen once, then back to me. Don't answer unknown numbers today, he said quietly. Let it go to voicemail. I let it ring. When it stopped, a text came through from the same number. This is Attorney Fields. Please call me regarding your family's property situation. Daniel reached for the phone, not taking it from me, just leaning close enough to read. His expression didn't change, but his voice turned slightly more focused. Good, he said. Now we have a clear channel. He pulled his own phone out and took a photo of the text for his records. Then he looked at me. This is the controlled setting, he said. We don't debate. We define reality. We respond in writing. I nodded. How do you want to handle it? I asked. Daniel opened his folder and pulled out a draft letter, already prepared, with my name at the top and the trust name underneath. We send a formal response, he said. We lay out the timeline. We include the deputy's case number. We attach the trust summary. We instruct them to cease contact directly with you and route everything through me. I watched him place the pages on the table in a neat stack. Then he added, almost casually, and we request preservation of evidence. I looked up. What evidence? I asked. Daniel met my eyes. The device used for the notary attempts, he said. The emails, the online accounts, the drafts, anything they delete after today can be interpreted the wrong way for them. He paused, then spoke in the same calm tone. It's not about revenge. he said. It's about making it harder for them to rewrite what happened. I nodded once. Do it, I said. Daniel started writing notes on the top of the draft, clean and tight. Outside, the lake wind shifted, and the porch chimes made a soft, metallic sound. The cabin felt like itself again. For the first time that day, I felt my shoulders drop. Not because everything was over, because everything was finally structured, and structure was something I could work with. Then Daniel's email app chimed on his phone. He glanced down, and for the first time that morning, his eyebrows lifted slightly. They moved fast, he said. He turned the screen toward me. It was an attachment from Attorney Fields, a demand letter, and at the bottom, there was a line that caught my eye immediately. It claimed my grandparents had signed a family understanding years ago, promising the cabin would be shared. Daniel didn't react emotionally. He just looked at me. Do you know anything about that? He asked. I stared at the screen, then shook my head once. No, I said, but I know exactly where they would have gotten the idea. I stood up and walked inside the cabin, straight to the hallway closet where my grandmother kept old folders and envelopes in a metal lockbox. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. I knelt on the floor, pulled the box out, and rested my hand on the latch. Then I looked back over my shoulder at Daniel. Stay here, I said. I'm going to show you something. Then I waited. The lockbox was heavier than I remembered. It was the kind my grandmother bought decades ago, plain metal, scuffed at the edges, with a simple key. She used it for things she didn't want floating around the house, not because she was paranoid, but because she was organized. I had the key on a ring in the kitchen drawer. My grandmother told me once, quietly, where she kept it. My parents never noticed. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and lifted the lid. Inside were folders, each labeled in my grandmother's neat handwriting: taxes, insurance, deeds, medical, correspondence, and one folder I hadn't seen before: family. I didn't react. I just pulled it out and carried it to the porch table where Daniel was waiting. I set it down gently, like it was fragile. Daniel didn't touch it right away. He looked at the label, then at me. I'm going to ask you something, he said. Has anyone had access to this box since your grandparents passed? No, I said. Not that I know of. The key stayed here. He nodded once. Okay, he said. Let's do this clean. He put on a pair of thin gloves from his folder, the kind lawyers keep for exactly this moment. He slid the folder toward himself and opened it carefully. Inside were a few things stacked in order: old holiday cards, a handwritten note from my grandfather about a contractor, 2 copies of my grandparents' wills, older drafts, and then, in the middle, a single page with a title typed at the top. Daniel leaned closer and read it silently. I watched his eyes move down the lines. When he finished, he flipped the page over. There was nothing on the back. Then he looked at me. This is not what they're claiming, he said. I exhaled, slow. What is it? I asked. Daniel placed the page in front of me. The title read, Family Requests and Responses. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a promise. It was a memo, a record. My grandfather had typed it, dated it, and signed it at the bottom. The first entry was from 2 years earlier. My dad had asked in writing about adding family members to the cabin deed for simplicity. Underneath, my grandfather's response was short and direct. No. Then another entry. My Uncle Ray asking about selling a portion of the land while the market is strong. Response: no. Then a third entry. My mom asking if the cabin could be used as a shared family vacation property with a rotating schedule. Response: no. Each one had a date. Each one had a line my grandfather wrote at the end, consistent every time. This cabin is to remain intact. It will transfer to Mara upon our passing. This is not a family asset. I felt my jaw tighten, not in anger, in certainty. Daniel tapped the bottom of the page. They're trying to turn this into a family understanding, he said. But this is the opposite. It's a documented refusal. He held up the demand letter Attorney Fields had sent and compared the language. They're claiming your grandparents promised shared ownership, he said. We can now prove your grandparents repeatedly declined that exact request. I nodded once. That's why they acted so confident, I said. They assumed there was something in here they could twist. Daniel's expression stayed calm. Or they assumed you wouldn't look, he said. He continued sorting through the folder. He found a second page, handwritten in my grandmother's pen. It listed 2 names, one after the other, with short notes beside them. Gary tries to guilt. Ray tries to rush. Daniel didn't comment. He just quietly photocopied it with his phone camera, saving it to the case file. Then he found something else. A small envelope, unsealed, with my name written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. Daniel didn't open it. He handed it to me. I held it for a second before tearing it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mara, if anyone pressures you about the cabin or our savings, call Daniel Mercer. Do not sign anything. Do not give keys. Do not explain. Protect the cabin first. We trust you. There was no extra emotion in it. No speech. Just instructions. I stared at it for a moment and then set it down on the table. Daniel watched me quietly. This letter, he said, is gold. I nodded. It's also them, I said. That's exactly how they were. Daniel gathered the pages into a neat stack. Here's what happens now, he said. We respond to Attorney Fields today with attachments. We give them the trust summary, the deputy's case number, and this memo. We also request that they withdraw the demand letter. And if they don't? I asked. Daniel's tone stayed steady. Then we file, he said. Injunction, declaratory relief confirming the trust, fees, and depending on what we can prove from those notary logs, potentially referral for investigation. I didn't flinch. Okay, I said. Daniel drafted the response right there at my porch table, laptop open, the lake wind moving the corners of paper. He kept it short and factual. No insults, no accusations, just structure. He included a timeline. February 4th, trust executed at 7:43 p.m. February 5th, attempted removal and presentation of fraudulent instruments, deputy present, case number included. February 5th, demand letter received claiming family understanding, contradicted by dated memo from decedent. He attached the memo and my grandmother's note. Then he sent it. We didn't wait long. Attorney Fields replied within 2 hours. Daniel's phone chimed and he read it quietly, then turned the screen toward me. It wasn't an apology. It was a retreat disguised as professionalism. Fields wrote that his clients may have been misinformed about prior agreements, and that they withdraw any claim of shared ownership pending further review. He asked for time. He asked for a pause. Daniel replied with one sentence. There will be no direct contact with Ms. Hale. All communication is through counsel. Any return to the property without written permission will be treated as trespass. That part mattered more to me than the legal wording, because it meant the next step was predictable. Predictable is manageable. Still, Daniel didn't treat it as finished. He opened a second document and slid it across the table. This is the credit freeze checklist, he said. We do it now, not because I think they'll steal your identity, but because they've already shown they'll try shortcuts. We spent the afternoon working through it. I called my bank and added a verbal passphrase. I updated email recovery settings. I changed passwords for anything that could touch property records, utilities, insurance. Daniel filed a notice with the county recorder requesting heightened verification for any future filings connected to the parcel. Not a guarantee, but a tripwire. Then he placed one last thing on the table. A simple written trespass notice template, already filled with names, the property description, and the case number. You don't have to use it, he said. But if they come back, you hand it over, and you call the deputy. No conversation. I nodded. Late that evening, after Daniel drove back down the mountain, I walked through the cabin with a small notepad and made a list the way my grandfather would have. Front door locks, replace. Back door locks, replace. Window latches, check. Gate chain, reinforce. Outdoor cameras, install. I went to the hardware store the next morning in town and bought what I needed. Not the fanciest, just reliable. By lunchtime, the locks were changed. By late afternoon, 2 small cameras were mounted, one facing the drive, one facing the porch. Nothing invasive, just enough to remove doubt later. The cabin felt steady again, not because it was quiet, but because it was defended by process. A week passed without contact. Then 2. My mom didn't call, my dad didn't text, Ray didn't send anything through his attorney. The silence wasn't peaceful at first. It was unfamiliar, like a room after a loud machine turns off, and you realize how tense your body had been. On the 3rd week, Daniel emailed me one final update. Attorney Fields confirmed in writing that they were withdrawing all claims, no further filings, no dispute. Daniel also confirmed the county title report came back clean. No liens, no clouds, no surprise instruments. I read the email twice, then printed it and filed it in the lockbox under correspondence, right where my grandmother would have put it. That night, I sat at the porch table with a mug of tea and listened to the lake move in the dark. I didn't feel victory. I felt order. I felt the absence of pressure, which is its own kind of relief. And I realized something else. The trust didn't just protect the property. It protected my time, my attention, my ability to breathe without waiting for someone to demand a piece of what wasn't theirs. When the wind shifted, the porch chimes rang softly again. I put my phone face down and let the quiet stay quiet. Then I waited. The first real sign that life had settled came on an ordinary Tuesday. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because the cabin was quiet in a way that made sleep feel optional. The air inside was cool and clean, the kind of cool that comes from wood walls holding on to the night. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the lake brighten slowly as the sun moved over the trees. No notifications, no missed calls, no new letters from attorneys, just the day. I took my mug outside and sat on the porch steps, the boards still a little damp from morning dew. One of the new cameras blinked a small light, steady and boring, which was exactly what I wanted. After coffee, I did a few simple chores the way my grandparents always did them. I wiped the counters, I swept the entryway. I checked the locks without thinking too hard about why. I opened the closet and reorganized the tools so I wouldn't have to search later. Then I walked down to the small garden patch my grandmother kept behind the cabin. The soil was dark from years of composting. The edge of the plot was lined with stones my grandfather had placed by hand. I knelt down and pulled a few weeds, slow and steady. The smell of dirt was grounding. My hands got dusty. I didn't mind. I planted 2 rows of herbs where my grandmother used to grow them. Nothing complicated. Basil, rosemary, a little thyme. When I finished, I rinsed my hands at the outdoor spigot and stood there for a minute, listening. There was no truck on the driveway, no engines, no voices, just wind and birds and a faint creak of wood as the porch warmed in the sun. Later that afternoon, I opened the lockbox again and added one more folder. Boundaries. Inside it, I placed the printed email from Attorney Fields confirming withdrawal, Daniel's final clean title report, the deputy's case card, and a copy of the trust summary. I labeled the tab in my grandmother's handwriting style, slow and neat. It wasn't for fear. It was for clarity. That evening, I cooked something simple, the way my grandmother would have approved of. A pot of stew with vegetables and enough salt to taste like comfort without trying too hard. I ate at the old oak table alone, not lonely, just present. After dinner, I washed the dishes, dried them, and put them away immediately. I didn't leave them for later. I noticed how different my body felt when I didn't have to brace for the next call. I realized that most of my childhood wasn't defined by big events. It was defined by the constant expectation that I'd adjust, accommodate, shrink, or explain. Up here, I didn't have to. I could make decisions and follow through. I could be quiet without being punished for it. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Mornings, coffee, a short walk along the tree line, a glance at the driveway camera, then I moved on. Afternoons, small repairs, organizing, maintenance that made the cabin stronger. Evenings, reading, tea, the fire if it was cold, early sleep. It was a life built out of calm choices, not excitement, not revenge, just stability. I heard small updates through the grapevine, the way you do in towns where people know each other. My Uncle Ray took contract work farther south for a while. Nothing steady, just chasing checks. My dad picked up extra hours. My mom stopped posting family photos online. Kyle finished the school year quieter than before, still playing football, but without the loud confidence he used to have. No one reached out to apologize. No one asked to rebuild anything. At first, that stung in a distant way. Then it stopped mattering. Because what I wanted wasn't an apology that would dissolve the moment it became inconvenient. What I wanted was predictable behavior. And I got it. One afternoon in early spring, I drove into town to pick up shingles for a small roof patch. The hardware store clerk, an older woman with a kind face, rang me up and glanced at the address on my account. "You're the one up on Hale Road," she said. I nodded. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I'm not trying to get in your business," she said. "But you did the right thing, protecting yourself." I didn't ask how she knew. In places like this, people know. I just said, "Thank you." When I got back to the cabin, I carried the supplies to the shed and found a folded note tucked between the junk mail in the mailbox. It wasn't from my parents. It was from a neighbor I barely knew, a man who lived 2 roads over. He wrote in block letters, like he didn't want his handwriting to be misunderstood. He said he'd heard about what happened, and he asked if I knew a good attorney. He didn't say much else, but the meaning was clear. Someone else was dealing with family pressure, too. I stood at the mailbox for a moment and looked down the road, quiet, letting that sink in. It reminded me that this situation isn't rare. It just stays hidden because people feel ashamed admitting they need boundaries with their own family. I took the note inside, placed it on the porch table, and made a small plan in my head. I'd give him Daniel's office number, and I'd keep it simple. No advice beyond that, just a direction. Because sometimes help isn't a speech, it's a contact name, a process, a next step. That night, I sat on the porch with tea again, watching the last light fade across the lake. The cabin didn't feel like a prize. It felt like a responsibility I could actually carry. And it felt like the first place in my life where the rules made sense. If you've ever